Hey folks, welcome to another video in this series about how to use GitHub Copilot and get the most out of that. 9 levels of enlightenment, I call this series, of things I went through, of an aha moment and learning a little bit more on, hey, if I do it like this, I get more value out of GitHub Copilot. This is video 8, and video 8 I called it Accept the Real Truth, and that sort of goes into the conversation of, it's a tool that helps write things for you or helps you understand things. It is based on a large language model that's under the covers there. And those things are non-deterministic. So if you even have the same context, the same code, and you ask the same question, you probably get a different answer. It might be very similar to the previous answer, but it probably is a little bit different than what you had before. And this is what we usually see when people have a basic understanding of Copilot. They expect super special, awesome, great stuff from an AI, because this is usually how these things are sold. It can do everything for you except for actually cutting your bread, things like that. And we're talking about code, and we've learned over the years that large language models work really, really well when you do this with code as well. But still, it's non-deterministic. It gives an example of, hey, I've based on what I have seen in the code bases that I've learned from, these are the suggestions that I would give you for this. So it is not picture perfect. A lot of people also are confused because it doesn't do any computation, for example. So asking GitHub Copilot for, hey, can you tell me something about code coverage in this project? It will try to explain to you what code coverage is and how you can calculate it. It might even try to explain to you that with the current set that it sees, you have 60% of code coverage. The hard thing there is that you need to accept that it tries to help you as much as possible, but there's no things like computation involved, for example. So it cannot do that actual mathematical exercise of calculating the code coverage in your project. So see this as a tool that can really help you. You're still a pilot. I really like the product name. It's a co-pilot that tries to help you. It tries to give you extra guidance, maybe point you in certain directions, and you can ask questions to that buddy that doesn't have an opinion, for example. It will not look down on you. It will not say there are no stupid questions. You can just ask things if you're scared of asking it to a normal person, for example. And it can try to help you with that. And the biggest thing is, especially when you're using the chat, is keeping in mind that this is part of a conversation. So it's not a one-time shot of, hey, try to get the best out of it and accept whatever's in there. If you don't like what is there, you can tweak it and get better at it. And that is part of that conversation. So keep that in mind as well. I'll try to do a mini demo and see how well this works. Because it's always interesting to see how far you can get with these kinds of things. And especially with GitHub Copilot, if you start asking too much in one go, there's always limited size of either the context that you can send into GitHub Copilot or the size of the suggestions you get back. Then often you see sort of the edges of what GitHub Copilot can do. And I'll try to explain that with an example that I have ready here as well. Switching to an editor, I'm running in a code space. And this is an example where I have multiple GitHub Actions workflow files. So I already know that I need to cover multiple files there. And I was looking for an example and I found something in here that was interesting. And this is part of the work that I like to do with GitHub Copilot because it gets me faster to the solution that I want to have. What I notice here, and here is this at the bottom, for example, I have a section in all of the 3 open files here that does something with my Git repository. So this is my pipeline that I have in there. This is one that checks for dependable updates, for example, to make sure that if we need to compile certain sets of code and we actually missed that there were changes in certain files, that we don't just willy-nilly push the pull request through. And you can see that here I'm doing something with git status, running through porcelain, for example, and then saying, hey, maybe we need to add certain files in here as well. In this case, I am focusing on a specific file that is in here because I'm adding that as extra status. So I do a git config in here, I do a git push, and I do that check in there as well. Well, in the other tab, I have something super similar. I have, again, the whole section here. I do a git status porcelain, I do a git config setup, and then I check specific files. Not sure if those are the two same files in the previous one, but in here I'm doing something very similar. And now, of course, as a human, you would go in and you would say, hey, is this exactly the same file as we had before? This is status.json and failed forks.json. So apparently we're doing something in the JSON file in here. Well, these are actually the same files. And in the dependable update, we have the same files in there. So basically this is a recurring pattern, and you can make that part of that conversation. And probably if I start asking questions on Copilot, I could get it to explain what we're trying to do here. I'm also rather confused of why we're doing a pull before we actually run git status, for example, because apparently we do certain things in the calls before that could make changes happen in here as well. So this is probably in here because I want to get the latest version of that code and then check things in. As we've seen in previous videos, I can hit Copilot. I usually start already with selecting the parts that I want to have that conversation on so that I'm not dependent on what is in there. So there's definitely some work for me as the human counterpart in this AI pair programmer as well. How can I extract this step into, let's say we use a composite action to centralize it. And you can see that I've actually overcome my fear of typos. That's one of the previous videos in the series as well. So just go with whatever is in there. The model will figure it out as much as possible on the back end on what that actually is. I know that a composite action is basically pulling this out into a separate script so that I can reference the script instead of having the same code everywhere. And it tries to explain to me what composite actions are, how you set those things up, and what will be in there as well. And this is where I'm going with, I wanted to see how far we can get with this, because most of the time Copilot does really a good job of helping with these things as well. So we have a whole setup here. Create a new action repository if necessary. You can also do that in the current repository. Composite action YAML file. So if you don't know what it is, you can actually ask those questions as well. Define the composite action, use the composite action. There's an action YAML here for the composite action, update dependable status. So this now becomes something that is tied to the current file that I'm working in, because I only asked the question on, hey, this is the selection. How can I extract this step? And you really need to understand that this is part of that conversation. That's why I have the accept the real truth as the topic for this video, because I started out with explaining I want to do this across multiple files, and I only picked one file. Compare this script with the same step in hashtag file, OSS fscan, and hashtag file repo info. So we can see that picks up more references now. It's briefly visible there. We've learned that across the other videos as well. But you can see that I'm not going for a one shot where this actually will fix everything. No, this is part of a conversation. I want to try to understand how this works with the other ones, and I'm not coding yet. I'm still trying to understand the problem. And commonalities here, same script. They both pull quiet. They both set the user email. There are differences. So the scripts are part of different workflow files. And interesting, this was refiltered by responsible AI. And then we can see if we can still get a result out of that, because I want to see what is in there. And potentially with responsible AI, it says something of, hey, there's something in this code that you shouldn't be using, for example, and I would like to learn. Are there any downsides of moving, centralizing this code? I don't want to go too far into that direction, but still I want to see if I can get a result out of that before I get back to the story. So overhead for small changes. Yeah, so I can really get an understanding in there, because I'm still trying to see how I can centralize those things as well. I can go in and say, update the composite action example to be a valid replacement for all 3 files. And the main thing to take away here is except that this is part of that conversation. It's not something you can just go in and do a one thing and go in and get a good result out of that. Usually you need to tweak something. Now you can see that the name of the composite action is already different from what it is trying to suggest, because I'm more specific in there. It's also now helping me breaking up the composite action in multiple steps. Instead of doing this as one step that I had before, I'm now doing this with, hey, pull the latest changes, configure Git, and then commit and push changes, so that we have a little bit more documentation of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do this. It even starts updating the first file already in here. So again, going back to that theme that we have for this video, accept that truth. This is no magic AI that will do everything for you. It's very good at what it does, but there's usually a couple of steps involved, and feel free to do that. It has an understanding of the session history while you're using chat. Make use of that and ask it to update certain things. Hey, I don't like the naming part in this thing. Hey, can you break it up in multiple steps? How can I also incorporate this in there as well? So with that, brings us to the conclusion of this level of enlightenment. And I hope that really helps you as well. This is not magic stuff. We need to really work and know how and understand how Copilot can do its work. And that is why I created the whole series of these videos, of course. So hope to see you in at least the next video. Do check out the other ones as well. They're listed on top here as well. So you can learn more on getting the most out of GitHub Copilot.